Hello, how are you? Thank you for looking in on my YouTube. Anyway, just to talk about today's subject, it's about somebody who committed a very serious drink driving offence and dangerous driving. So, just to talk a bit about drink driving, driving with excess alcohol. It's an offence that's come down over the years. Back when it was first introduced, there were lots of people convicted for driving without excess alcohol, and gradually it's been coming down. I think times have changed. People don't go out to the pub so much. Perhaps we don't drink so much alcohol in the UK as we used to. So it's quite interesting, really. Now, the interesting thing about most offending is committed, I've done a rough drawing here, but I don't know if you can see, but most offending occurs around sort of late teenage, when people are 18, 19, 20, and then there's a big drop off when people are aged 25. People seem to settle down age 25, and they're not taking so many so many risks, and not making so many mistakes and things like that. So a lot of offending seems to be related to our upbringing, how we got on at school. Most certainly, kids that have experienced trauma at home are much more likely to offend. Now, most offences are committed by men as well. Interestingly, though, although there's a drop-off for general crime at 25, alcohol-related offending tends to occur when people are in their 30s, and it's mostly men that commit drink driving offences. In the year 2020, nearly 14,000 men were prosecuted for alcohol-related drink driving offences, and between 25 and 30, there was about 8,000. So quite an increase. So the majority of alcohol-related offending tends to be committed by men in their 30s. Women, by contrast, there's about 2,500 in that year were convicted for drink driving offences. So that was in 2020. So considerably less. And statistics tend to show that women tend to have less accidents too on the roads. And they're different sort of accidents. They tend to be at junctions, whereas men seem to involve speed. Now, just to show you that actually we have been making progress in the country, the lower line are accidents caused by drink driving, and the upper line are general accidents that are not necessarily alcohol related. But you can see that from the 70s, it's been going down and down and down right up to today. So, there's been progress over the years. There was a bit of a rise in 2022 and everybody was alarmed. But actually, overall, we've been making progress. There are less and less alcohol-related drink driving offences over the years. And we're in the league table of all nations. I think the USA are top. One of the worst performing countries for alcohol-related drink driving offences, and we're about halfway down a league table. So quite interesting, isn't it? But I think good news is that there's been a lot of health education about alcohol and smoking, and I think, as people grow up, they realise the risks of drink driving, and it's been less and less people are doing it. So I'm going to talk about a specific offence that occurred in the 1990s. I changed some of the details slightly to protect the identity of the offender, but it's based on a real case that I dealt with back in the 1990s, and involved a 40-year-old man who was seen to come staggering out of a nightclub about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the police observed him, and they saw him at a traffic light, and the light went red, and he had like a delayed reaction. His car went over the line and stopped over the line. So they thought, oh, hello, what's this? So they began to follow, and he then proceeded down the wrong side of a dual carriageway, which is horrendous, isn't it? Absolutely frightening, and who knows what could have happened. You know, this is exceptionally dangerous, really, driving down the wrong side of a dual carriageway. Absolutely, you know, awful. He then turned off, and he went down several side streets, and eventually arrived at his house, and he came to an abrupt halt because he crashed into 3 motor cars outside, 3 of his neighbours' cars. And the police caught up with him by then, and they breathalyzed him, and he was found to be 3 times over the limit, which is very high indeed, and very, very worrying. Fortunately, he didn't injure any members of the public, but my God, he could have done, and he would have been going to jail for a very long time if he had crashed into somebody and killed, say, another person. That would have been awful. But as it was, he damaged 3 cars and he hurt himself quite badly. He ended up in hospital for, I think it was 8 weeks, and he had trouble with his discs, and I had to go. He couldn't come to the office. He was housebound, spending a lot of the time in a wheelchair, struggling with his walking, and he was awaiting for an operation. He was genuinely really shocked and ashamed of his offence. He said he was hugely embarrassed, particularly for damaging his neighbours' cars, and he said he had no excuses for his behaviour, which they're not. And what was frightening was he said he couldn't remember what had happened. He said he had some sort of blackout, which is absolutely scary, isn't it? And I think he was being genuine. He wasn't telling me stories, but he was so frightened. And he said he's so frightened that he never wants to drive again. Basically, as well, an interesting point is that he was an epileptic. Now, he said that he had sort of blackouts, epileptic fits at night time, and the law states that if you have any sort of epileptic fit, you shouldn't drive for a whole year. What worried me was he was on medication that dulls your senses, and I think it was exceptionally foolish of him to drink to excess, you know, massively to excess, and to be on serious medication that dulls your senses. So that was exceptionally foolish of him, and, you know, really bad. But he was genuinely ashamed, and he said he wanted to change his life completely, didn't want to drive again. And he actually wanted to go around schools and give talks about what had happened to him, because he just felt that he didn't want what had happened to him happen to other people. Now, that evening, what had happened was his boss had asked him to come out. They got a new contract. They were doing security work and things like that. And his boss asked him to go and celebrate this big contract that they got. And it involves some driving as well at a nightclub. And really, he drove there, and he said he'd made arrangements for a taxi to come and pick him up at a certain time. I can't remember, 2 o'clock or whatever, before he even set out. But for whatever reason, his manager disappeared during the evening. I think went off with a young lady. And our man didn't get in the taxi. I think possibly his boss did, and left him, which I think is awful, because if you go out with someone, you need to look out for your friends when you go out drinking, and you need to look out for each other. I think it's awful to leave somebody behind who's worse for wear, worse for drink. And we all owe a duty of care to each other to make sure we all get home safely. But he got in his car and he said he had no recollection of getting into his car. And that is absolutely scary. The other really odd thing about this offence too was the court papers, the record of previous convictions, said that he had no previous convictions. Now, this has been an issue before in my talks, that back in the 1990s, a worryingly high number of cases I dealt with had incorrect record of previous convictions. So much so that looking back, I kind of think, why did we tolerate this? Why didn't we kick up a stink about it? I think it was terrible. But his actual record said he had no record of convictions. But this man volunteered that he'd had an awful upbringing, terrible time, really unsettled background, experienced a lot of abuse at home from his father. And he committed a very serious offence, aged about 18, I think, for which he was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. Now, I'm not sure what that offence was, because I didn't make note of it, and I didn't make mention of it, but he got 4 years custody, and he came out on 2 years on parole. He said that he was exceptionally fond of his probation officer throughout this period, because he had the same probation officer who helped him immensely. And his probation officer got him doing all sorts of positive things, like he did art, and he discovered he had quite a good talent in art. He developed writing skills, and he even wrote poetry, and he was quite creative by all accounts. And he even had some poetry published in a magazine, which I think is terrific. He came out of prison, and his probation officer really helped him sort himself out. And he put him on a positive path, really, because this drink driving offence, he's now aged 40, was his first offence since 18. He hadn't reoffended, which I think is, considering his background, he'd done well. And he came out and joined the army at some point. I don't know how he managed to do that, but they took him on in the army. He did quite well. He got married to his partner, aged 20, but unfortunately he had to be discharged from the army due to his epilepsy. And they took the view that he shouldn't have been accepted into the army with this epilepsy. So this epilepsy had been a problem for him. You know, he said that he had a duty to tell future employers about it, and many didn't offer him a job because of it. But eventually he did various jobs and things like that, some on building sites and things like that. But he got into the security, and he kind of worked his way up the security company for his boss, and he did quite well. But it did involve driving, which worried me. Oh, by the way, he was given an exemplary discharge from the army, despite, because of his epilepsy. So there he was. I was interviewing him at his home, and he said he was really frustrated that he couldn't go out and work and earn money. And, you see, he was in a bit of a financial predicament, because he damaged 3 cars. And when you drink drive, you're not covered by insurance. And so he had to pay for the damage for his neighbours' cars and his own car out of his own pocket, which cost him an awful lot of money. And he sold his own car, he raised money, had some savings and things like that. So he managed to pay for all the damage, but he was really struggling financially. And luckily his partner worked. He and his partner had 4 children, aged between 13 and 19 years old. The youngest child had exhibited all sorts of behavioural problems. But interestingly, since he'd been at home, this 13-year-old's behaviour improved considerably, because he, you know, this man, although a lot of the time in his wheelchair, taking on a lot of the duties at home, cooking and doing the day-to-day bits and pieces, but just being there with his son had resulted in a huge improvement in his son's behaviour. So what on earth did we come up with for this man? Well, what we did, I kind of argued that he was genuinely sorry, and I think sending him to prison would have been very damaging for him and his family, really. And it'd been a huge salutary lesson for him, this awful offence. So I think he had a bit of a drink problem, in that once he started drinking, he found it difficult to stop. He tended to walk to the pub and walk back. That night at the nightclub, he felt really out of place because they're all a lot younger than him, and you know, and he drank far too much. So essential that we offered him a program to bring control to his drinking and some curb his binge drinking, and that involved educational work, but also we gave him counselling, alcohol counselling. So we had a alcohol program. We put him on a program, employment program, to help him look at his skill set, actually, because he had lots of skills that could get him into different employment. I felt that he could do all sorts of things, actually, like he could work in a call centre perhaps, or so there were lots of opportunities. He did have offer of more security work with a dog, where he would be driven to work and then collected and driven back, but we were going to look at boosting his education and looking at other, you know, careers and employments for him. Also, I was going to put him in touch with a charity that does driving education about road safety, and to become a volunteer speaker for this road safety, and talk about what happened to him and how awful, you know, what really could have happened, because he could have really damaged somebody or even killed somebody on the road. It doesn't bear thinking about, the shock of it. So it's something he's keen to do, and I was keen to see it through, and I thought it was something worthwhile. The other thing that needed to be done, he needed a bit of a help oversight with his finances, looking at that, help put them on in order. And instead of going to jail, what we proposed was a curfew order be placed on him, you know. So it could be, say, from 6 in the evening till 7 in the morning, or it could be around his work, you know, it could be a daytime, but we were keen to put a curfew order in, so he's grounded, you know, he can't go out, and we're going to stop him going to public houses as well, and so, you know, rather than jail, but it's up there regards community sentences, so he's going to have plenty to do. I hope you agree with the plan. I actually think that prison wouldn't have done any good at all. It would have probably resulted in more problems at home, and we needed to get him up being a law-abiding citizen again and doing positive things. But within that, his punishment would be a curfew. He paid back, to his credit, his neighbours, which I thought was good. So that's it. He's a bit unusual. I was going to say that for a number of years I've done all sorts of drink driving reports, and I was quite surprised that quite a few often were due to stressful circumstances, things going wrong in people's lives. Quite a number of them. I remember somebody passed away, a bereavement, and or a relationship breakup, and the guy would go back to the pub, go back to his ways when he was a teenager. Now he was going back to the pub with his old mates and drinking again. So it's quite interesting, really, that it's not always frivolous behaviour. It's sometimes linked to a problem, you know, like somebody dealing with a bereavement really badly and resorting to alcohol. So it's not always stupid, frivolous behaviour. But I think, luckily, the drink driving fatalities and drink driving offences coming down year on year. But we want to get it down to 0, don't we? Anyway, all the very best. I hope you enjoyed listening to this video and finding it interesting. Don't forget to look out for the book that I wrote. It's quite interesting. It's called You, the Sentencer, and you're given a number of court reports and you decide how these people should be sentenced. Anyway, look out for it. The details on my YouTube page, and all the very best. Cheers now. Bye-bye.